Welcome to another conversation with the Apostate Sisters. I'm Patti, and I'm here with my sister Nancy, and we grew up in a doomsday cult called the Worldwide Church of God. We're also nerdy about history and culture, but critical of religion. So get ready to get mad or to nod your head in agreement as we take on part 3 of Herbert W. Armstrong, his life and influences. Last time, we went through the Radio Church of God, the first iteration of what would, by 1968, become the Worldwide Church of God. So today is all about the 1970s. Well, I guess before we get started, we were thinking we might want to share a little bit about what's going on with the Apostate Sisters channel, because we have a new show coming.
So UnPack-It, our new series that's coming out April 19th. We have mentioned this before, but we are collaborating with Joel from Mr. Difficult, who is still a Christian. He's a language expert. He's really funny.
Wait, what? Someone say my name? I felt a disturbance in the force. This Christian? Nerd? Kilt wearing? Question asking? Chinese speaking? Cult survivor? Yeah, that's me. And this is my channel.
We get his insight into this as well, where we read cult literature. In particular, we're starting off with the Missing Dimension in Sex, which is a sex manual. Yes, a fucking sex manual written by Herbert W. Armstrong.
We haven't gotten to the juicy parts yet, though.
We haven't, but we've still had fun. Even as boring as this book is, we've already recorded several episodes. It's still entertaining. I mean, it's his style of writing and how he conveys his message, which is a lot of word vomit that we have concluded, but
propaganda.
Yeah, but it's fascinating.
I'm so excited for UnPack-It to start.
Me too.
Everybody get ready. April 19th. Woohoo! We're going to unpack some bullshit. All right, before we get started with our content for the day, I wanted to give a shout out to one of our favorite creators, Durante Lamar. He is a Black atheist here on YouTube, and he's just putting out some amazing content. He's a former pastor, and he is kind of taking some shit from people in his comments right now. So, oh my gosh, everybody, if you follow
Give him
us,
some love. He's
give him some love. Go follow Durante, subscribe, comment, like his shit. It's amazing. So don't miss out on Durante Lamar. And look in the description. His information will be there. Well, what are you drinking there, Nancy?
Wine.
Oh,
so
wine.
Our first video, I just happened to have bourbon that day. So it was bourbon and spectacles. Then I only had vodka, so it was a screwdriver. And now I'm having wine.
And I have the spectacles.
And you have the spectacles. Perfect. Yeah, Pat, so it was an interesting week, huh? We had the eclipse this week on April 8th, which was also the day that David C. Pack said the world was going to end. One of many world was going to end.
Oh, and he's the leader of the Restored Church of God, which is like the evil twin, basically, of the Worldwide Church of God, which was already evil. So,
or evil stepchild, whatever you want to call it. So
maybe that makes more sense.
I mean, you and I have personal beef with this guy because our mother is still mentally imprisoned by this man.
Yeah.
And our father was excommunicated from him for asking logical questions. So
he dared to challenge David C. Pack.
And we get some great information from our friend over at X Restored COG. She posts a lot of wonderful videos on David C. Pack. Doesn't even have to do anything. David C. Pack, the man speaks for himself. So there was a video that had come out recently stating essentially that the world was going to end, or that like the rapture, the world tomorrow was going to happen on 51 days from the date that he said, and that was April 8th. So I don't know if he purposely coincided that with the eclipse that we had just witnessed.
Christ.
So I'm telling you, some people are afraid to sell all. They won't. They don't have the faith. I'm telling you, you got 51 days. If you are sitting on funds, extra houses, or cash, you are commanded by God to sell all, or at best you will face 4 years of sore trial.
I tell you what, though, there were some really funny memes that came out along with this latest eclipse. It was really funny. Like one actually said that so somebody wanted to release all these human-sized balloons to show that, and then there were people going up to heaven. It was so great.
There was like a follow-up that was like that idea combined with flat Earth. And it was like all the people floating against the top of the dome.
There was another meme out there that said something like, I survived the 5th end of the world. Congratulations to me. You know, it's like when natural disasters happen around the world, you mark in Facebook, like, I'm marked safe from the belief that the world was going to end with the eclipse.
Do you remember when we were in India? We were at the Taj Mahal and there was a partial solar eclipse.
That was
I mean,
amazing.
that was really fucking cool.
That
The
was
world
fun.
didn't end then either, it turns
The
out.
world didn't end, and I didn't want it to. I mean, I'm enjoying the world. Sorry, I am.
Yeah. It's not fallen. Fuck all the way off. It is
You
what
know
we make
why?
it. Come on, we can do better.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes.
I have big feelings about that.
Yeah.
It might be that I got told there was this world tomorrow thing coming as a kid, and it made me believe in us, that we could do better together.
The church and Herbert W. Armstrong's teachings that led to things like marriages breaking up, suicides, people not being able to trust in their own abilities, which the church taught.
Yeah.
People had no joy in life. They didn't know how to live life. They were like living under a very dark cloud. And you see the religious trauma still trickling down, people getting into abusive relationships, no
Yes.
modern medicine that Herbert W. Armstrong taught. There's people coming out there to be like, I lost a child, I lost a family member or friend because
Oh,
Armstrong, trust me, Pat, so many stories are going to come out that are far worse than ours. So
okay. Yeah, we do seem like we're in an interesting time where there's kind of a social interest in cults in general. And I think there's just like so much more understanding about us humans and our psychology, like how we think, how we work, what affects us, nurture versus nature, all of that stuff. Like maybe it's just the spaces I hang out in, but I feel like there's this growing awareness and desire to be able to have space to address our traumas. And I think you're right. We experienced something that was probably really mild, just because of who our parents were in general, compared to what other wild things people experienced because of their particular lives, plus the influence of the church. Yeah.
right.
This is important shit that people need to be talking through and working through so that we can have a better world for all of us. Like, I'm sorry, I'm still doing the world tomorrow thing, but like, right, unpacking our shit is how we stop hurting each other.
All right, shall we go through this timeline?
Okay, so this is all about the 1970s, right? So we're talking 1968, the Radio Church of God got turned into the Worldwide Church of God, which to me, looking at what we're going to see today about the 70s, it seems like something shifted when the name change happened, where like I'm feeling like Armstrong kind of shifted his focus to try to really grab a hold of the worldwide part of the name of his church.
Right.
Yeah. Like he really tried to embody it.
Yeah. And I think other members might say this too, that the 70s were very significant for Worldwide Church of God, not only because Armstrong changed the name from radio to worldwide. I think that says a lot about him too, that he started meeting with all these foreign dignitaries, all these people of wealth and power and title. I've read certain people's books, like ex-evangelists from his church, that would say he would do whatever it took to be able to like be next to people in power, men that he saw as having great power. And like he would stand around, like he wanted to get invited to things. He wanted to get pictures where he was either next to them or shaking their hand. I mean, there was even in Armstrong's autobiography, he talks about little things, like he was in an elevator once with this General Funston, who was a significant figure and Medal of Honor recipient during the American-Philippine War. but the dude was just drunk next to him in the elevator and he needed help being carried to his room. But Armstrong had to make a point that he was next to this kind of
What?
infamous figure, had
I,
nothing to do with him or his story, nothing. He had to make a note of it.
if Herbert was around in modern times, he'd be the person like selfieing himself with famous people.
Mhm.
So gross.
Yeah. Armstrong knew the circle jerk long before Instagram came onto the scene where you're like, I'm going to follow you so that you can follow me. Yep. But also, Armstrong was an
Oh.
early pioneer of radio. And so he had like a window into these, more or less developing countries to be able to get on that train. He had the Plain Truth magazine was huge. It was booming by this point. And people around the world wanted to get on the cover. And so it's kind of like, you do me that favor, I'll do you this favor, the tit for tat world. Yeah. Anyway,
Wow.
yeah. So we'll get
I
into it.
mean, I guess you could give that a positive spin, like, oh, it's networking, which we're all told is a good thing and how we're supposed to do stuff, but it all just seems so disingenuous. And I have to take note of the fact that by the time we get to, I don't know if it was late 70s or the 80s, but we had normalized like ostentatious wealth, at least in this country,
Mhm.
where we
Right.
had shows like Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. And like, it's so fucking gross to me. So
Yeah.
it's weird how he would be ranting and raving against those types of things and living that way to his people. But yet, as we'll find out, he's living about as ostentatiously as it gets, private jets, all that shit.
Right.
Good
Because
times.
yeah, and wealth is still equated with success even these days. I think it was definitely more so during this time period. But yeah, regardless of whether they did honorable things to amass that wealth or not, in this case, we know that Armstrong's members, I would say a good majority of them lived in poverty, our parents included, because they gave all the money to the organization. The only people that had money within the Worldwide Church of God and its splinter churches were the ones that were at the top. The
I,
evangelists,
yeah.
the ministers, Armstrong
Mhm.
himself.
I do think well, we'll get to this, but I do think by the 80s, they were seeking out members that had extreme wealth, like on purpose to drive up a look about who they were in the world.
I believe
But
it.
yeah.
I believe it. But those little
Oh,
people at the bottom, like our parents, they didn't have much money, but it was still income for them. You have enough members with even just a little bit of money, and they still brought in sizable amounts. And we'll discuss that today because, yeah, we're in the 1970s. Here we go.
all right,
All right.
1970s. Whew, let's do
Now,
it.
all right, so we got the timeline here, Pats. We left off at 1968 when Radio Church of God got renamed to Worldwide Church of God. That brings us to 1972. Something had happened with Armstrong's son, Garner Ted. Now, he got suspended, okay? This wasn't his excommunication. His son, Garner Ted, remember, he was quite the figure during this time period. It was his face that people mostly saw, not Armstrong's. And
Yeah.
Ted
Ooh.
had all kinds of scandals surrounding him. So,
You're so
this,
excited for this, I can tell.
I know. I know. Well, I'm of the mind that people can do what they want. Garner Ted Armstrong was being investigated by the church for extramarital affairs, and lots of them. Like I said in the last episode, he was at Ambassador College in Pasadena. He had a lot of young, attractive female co-eds. And reportedly, he
Mhm.
banged a lot of them. There's even one guy, I
Whoa.
forget who it
Let's say
was.
he was a little more handsome than his dad at this point.
Yeah, he was much better looking than his dad. He was very charming. Again, I don't think he actually believed this shit. He took advantage of a situation where he was like, you know what? I kind of have to get on board with what my dad's doing, so I'm going to be an evangelist as well. And I think he was loving the publicity of it. Again, he had
Mhm.
women all over the place. He was married with at least two, maybe three kids, I want to say. I mean, so that sucks that all this was going on. His wife had no idea. It sounds like she was saying things like, "Hey, I won the husband jackpot." She was
Oh,
thinking like she really apparently really loved Ted. And all this came out. But of course, you know how it goes. Garner Ted got suspended for, I want to say, about 4 months.
Suspended like it's fucking high school.
But he was reinstated back in the church because he did the whole bit like, well, I admit my faults. I sinned against God. I sinned against the people. I sinned against my family. And of course, the church took him back. This is Armstrong's son. Of course, he's going to take him back.
He couldn't
But
give
this-
up that $100,000 a year salary. I mean, come
No.
on. You got to preserve that.
Yeah. But there were a lot of people that were very upset that Garner Ted had done all this. They're like, oh, he's bringing shame to the church and all this. There was even one rumor I found that he was a bisexual, which, whatever. I think that was somebody that really tried to go after him. Again, whatever. It was just one of the scandals that kind of kicked off the 1970s in the Worldwide Church of God.
So we're saying we hit 1970 and it's like everybody's in love with Ted Fest.
Yes.
And then it
He's
starts
a
falling
major
apart. Excellent.
Mhm. But this is very significant because it leads to the downfall of Garner Ted and kind of the separation of him and his father, which I think a lot of that rift came from one Stanley Rader, who was the lawyer and accountant for Armstrong, which I mentioned him last time. We're going to talk about him a lot more in this, but
Great.
he was Armstrong's right-hand man. He did not want Garner Ted being in the picture at all. Stanley Rader wanted that spot. So you got some serious dick sword fighting going on between Garner Ted Armstrong and Stanley Rader. Okay. Again,
So we're
about-
talking that they both kind of saw themselves as the ones to take over the work from Herbert, right?
right. Which of course would have always been Ted Armstrong. There was like no question about it. But then when Ted had all these allegations that came out and he admitted to infidelities and all that, I mean, Stanley Rader, I think, jumped in on that. He's like, okay, I'm going to jump in here because I'm the one that's going to take over Armstrong's empire. Yeah.
Opportunity. As
Power
if that guy
struggles
didn't
at
have
its-
it good enough. Jeez. The greed. The greed. I mean, the
Power
exact
struggles.
the exact thing they spent all their time railing against, and that is everything that was going on behind the scenes is the greed among them. Fuck.
Power struggles at its finest. Yep.
Kind of funny actually to look back at them and their what'd you call it? Dick sword fighting?
Or dick measuring, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Those two were just at each other's throats. Anyway. Again, this is all taking place before we were even born.
Right.
So,
We're getting closer though.
all right. Come June 19th, 1973, a very significant date in the timeline here. Armstrong met with the Emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie. I hope I said that correctly, but he was the emperor who was in power until about the time of the Ethiopian Revolution. And for some reason, Armstrong got connected with him. So they met at the National Palace, which used to be called Jubilee Palace. Yeah, I don't know how they got connected, but there's something with Armstrong where his employees would always reach out to people in foreign power and see if he could get meetings with them. I guess he just happened to be one of them. But this emperor was on the cover of the Plain Truth magazine, so you got to figure he's also getting exposure by being connected with Armstrong because Armstrong is getting quite the following at this point. All right.
Well, and the benefit to Armstrong is then he gets to get his plain truth into that country and potentially more followers. Because they were doing church groups. I mean, as kids, I remember seeing video of, people in different countries all jumping around excited about the Worldwide Church of God. So
Cringe.
Horrible. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, cringe.
Okay, so
who gets excited about this shit? Nobody.
Well, it's the people that Herbert went after, which is people who were vulnerable and had been through some stuff because they like the message like that.
So get this, the sort of things that Armstrong talked about with the Emperor of Ethiopia, who, by the way, is the actual emperor who is a pivotal figure in Rastafarianism. I have friends that live in Jamaica. I was just there visiting them last week. And there's this little Rastafarian village that is literally like a 2-minute drive from where they live. This is alive and well, this concept that
Still.
yes, that Selassie is like the second coming of Christ. He's the Messiah. This is still a thing. But I thought it was
Okay.
interesting that
I'm sorry. It's so okay. No, I'm fine.
this
Go
this is
on.
why I'm drinking, Patti. Yeah.
That's so ridiculous.
For a long time, I thought that being a Rastafarian was literally more of a cultural thing down in Jamaica where, okay, you wear the dreadlocks, you smoke a lot of weed. No, it very much rooted in this sort of concept that I want to say started in like the 1930s. Yeah.
Wait, so Rastafarian it's got Christianiness about it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, I learned something
Because it's
today.
like the Ethiopian Orthodox Church or some shit like that.
What?
Yeah.
Okay.
Look it up. Another thing I found interesting when I was down in Montego Bay last week, a friend of mine who I've known for years down there is a Seventh-day Adventist. Yes, a Sabbath-keeping church member. Apparently, Seventh-day Adventist is kind of all over the place in Jamaica. We had gone out for a drink on Friday night, and she just kind of talked about how guilty she felt about having a drink on the Sabbath. Yeah, she used the word Sabbath, and that's when I was
Did you
like,
die inside a little?
a little bit. I was like, you just said Sabbath, so we got to talk. And that's what I discovered, yeah. Even Assemblies of God is down there.
It's like the next branch of, or the next iteration of colonization. You know, like during full colonizing world times, I think they would send in the missionaries first to like soften up the people a little bit before they moved in. We're like, hey, so how about you give us the rights to all of your resources?
Or be like Christopher Columbus, who landed in Jamaica when he told people about this, eclipse or something that was going to happen. He mentioned that if you don't give food for all my people, because we shipwrecked here, because he knew it was going to happen. And it did. And then he got the people to do whatever he wanted. Isn't that gross?
That's disgusting. Seriously, every American should be looking at the real story of Christopher Columbus because our little nursery rhymes about the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria can fuck all the way off because that man was a bad man.
He
And
was.
the things that he did are really not that different than the same slick ride that Armstrong was taking himself on.
Right.
It just
Well,
looks a little different.
Christopher Columbus sold 12 and 13-year-old girls into sexual slavery. He had sexual slaves on his own. He used to cut people's ears off. You're telling me this is like,
Ugh, blah. Yeah, Herbert W. Armstrong wasn't doing those things, but he was absolutely harming, imprisoning. He was hindering people. He was hindering people, not directly cutting off parts of their body, but cutting off parts of themselves that were available to themselves for living their life.
and
It is the same shit.
just to add to that point, you said Herbie wasn't doing all that, and yet there were allegations that he molested his daughter.
Yeah. There's court
Yeah.
filings about the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. And there's court filings saying that people were going to be hush hush about it. And this is something that the church tried to cover up. Whether it was true or not, the church tried to cover it up. I'm not sitting here saying that it actually happened. There's only two people that know for sure whether it did, and they're both dead. Whoops. That is not the time for balloons. I'm sorry.
It's funny.
There's nothing I'm going to state here that people cannot find publicly online.
Right.
But the allegations were absolutely there. And Ted Armstrong was the one that came out and said, I spoke to my sister and she said, yes, this happened to me. So whether or not Ted was trying to get back at his father for his suspension, excommunication, whatever, that's to be seen. But either way, it didn't look good for the church. Not that it really mattered to the people who were highly devoted to him. There was nothing that would have steered them away from that man.
I mean, we talk about mental control a lot. I mean, holy crap, to be able to look past stuff like that.
And I'm sorry, we're totally going off tangent, but
okay.
Let me get back to, you want to know the kinds of things that Armstrong talked about with the Emperor of Ethiopia. They went on talking about how they were born 8 days apart, only 8 days apart. And I'm sure Armstrong brought up some profound meaning of the number 8. He always does, right?
Well, I don't know. They were supposed to circumcise a baby on the 8th day after birth.
Mm.
That's the only 8 I know of.
Also, they both claimed that they have traced their lineage back to King Solomon and King David. That's the exact reaction I was hoping.
It's so stupid. It's so stupid. You know what? Nancy,
Yes.
you know what? I was born of Marie Antoinette. Did you know that? God damn
Guess
it.
what
That's
else, Pats? I've
so
done
warm.
Ancestry.com. And so we're going to get on the Armstrong train right now. So we are actually related in some way to Captain Cook, which he didn't have children, but his sister did. And we're connected to that timeline. Also, our great, great, great grandfather is one Amos Ives Root, who invented modern day beekeeping. And he created what is now the Root Candle Company over there in Ohio. You're welcome. That's our claim to fame.
So everyone should subscribe to us because we have famous roots.
Like, do you feel any different knowing that we had a famous great, great, great grandfather?
I mean, if you go far enough back, like we're all related to like Charlemagne or whatever the fuck. Because he fucked everyone, but
How many people in the population are related to what is it? The Mongolian
Genghis Khan.
Genghis Khan. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I've heard
Genghis-
it's obscene. Like the number of people in the world that are directly related to him is obscene. It's so weird.
Does it really matter? But again, this was Armstrong's way of showing that he has all these famous roots. You know, he talks about the first fruits and lineage and genealogy. Like he was all about, oh, who am I related to? Getting back to, yeah, the Emperor Selassie. As far as I know, Armstrong may have met with him once or twice again, because the following year he was killed by the Derg regime. That was 1974. And so that was during the Ethiopian Revolution. But Armstrong thought it significant to note that he had become friends with him like a year prior to his death. Now, 1974, that same year that the emperor was killed. Dedication of the Ambassador Auditorium. We're familiar with this place, very familiar. Now, this was on the Ambassador College campus in Pasadena, California. Many people have called this the Carnegie Hall of the West. It was this massive, very elegant concert hall that
Okay, wait a second. Have
What?
many people called it that, or did Armstrong and the church call it that? I'm
There you
sorry.
go.
It just
Okay,
seems like
well-
what they would do to self-aggrandize while telling everyone to not self-aggrandize.
But you know what Armstrong did? He had to invite some of the most famous people at the time, which included Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, and I think Sammy Davis Jr. was also a performer there. Yes, the very same
Oh.
hall where we went to our Feast of Tabernacles.
Oh, I checked with Mom. We never went to Feast of Tabernacles there. We did
But we
go.
were there.
We were there because we had a grandmother in Pasadena for a while. So we did
Okay.
go down and visit, and when we went, we did go to church there. And maybe we were there for like a Feast of Trumpets or something, but we were just there kind of
okay.
randomly. Yeah. Okay. My one big memory that is
I
actually
have one
kind of
too.
okay, good. So my one big memory from that building was in the front lobby space where everything's covered in gold. They had
Sounds like
this
Trump.
I know. They had this enormous cage that had a parrot of some kind. I don't remember.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I
So
remember the parrot.
and it talked, and I don't know, it definitely wasn't actually saying my name, but they made it say Polly want a cracker. I don't know what the fuck, right? And it to me it sounded like it was saying Patti. So as a kid, I just thought that was the greatest moment ever.
Over 1,200 people could be seated in this hall. When its dedication took place, even the Vienna Symphony Orchestra was playing there. Because Armstrong had very refined taste. You know, he's starting to amass crazy amounts of wealth, which I can cover more. But by this point, I'm like, he's just living it up. He's elegant as fuck. But I have a funny story about Ambassador Hall too.
Okay.
I pissed myself in one of the seats. I shit you not. The reason was I was a little child. I don't remember what we
Yeah.
were there for. It was just a sermon or something, but you remember these horrific, like closing sermons where we had to stand there, our eyes closed, looking down. It felt like maybe 15, 20 minutes. And so, in fact, sometimes it was.
Mm-hmm.
I had to pee so bad. I was a little girl in a flowery little dress sitting there waiting to use the toilet. Mom and dad wouldn't let me go because the service was almost over. And this closing sermon lasted so long. Excuse me, I meant to say closing prayer. Closing prayer. And I couldn't hold it any longer. I had to sit in the chair and I just pissed myself. Yeah.
Aw.
Isn't that lovely? I remember kind of where it was too. Yeah.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I was totally unaware of it at the time.
That's fine. But
Oh,
that's one of the
poor little
memories I have of that
you.
place. I pissed in one of the seats. Yeah.
Well, and you've said before that you have a hard time like closing your eyes in public. And so that sounds like it might be a connected memory of that like deep, assuming like embarrassment at the time,
It
maybe?
might be. I was the only one that really knew about it. But again, I'm a little girl and I'm like, I pissed myself in this
They
right
didn't
in this
know?
seat. No one knew.
Nancy, you didn't even get help and love from a parent after that?
That's too much to ask for, Pats. I have you
The
now.
fact that you hid it and didn't know to expect that you would be treated better and paid
I don't know why they
attention
couldn't
to.
just fucking take me to the bathroom. I'm a child. I literally sat there and pissed in the seat because the closing sermon was going on and on and on for so long, and I was refused to use the bathroom. It's like
I'm
when we
sorry,
were kids.
Nancy. That wasn't
You're
fair to
fine,
you.
Pats. See, we're remembering all these stories as we're
Yeah.
talking about it.
See, yeah, it's not the point about like, oh, I peed myself. Like, whatever, kids do that. It happens,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the fact that it points to you not being listened to as their habit, that your needs, physical, emotional, whatever,
Right.
were not the priority in raising you up.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think that's fucking stupid. I do.
I love that this
Children
makes you.
are the future adults. It's really fucking important how we treat them, that we listen to them, see what they're about, let them follow their curiosity. God damn it, I'm going to get too worked up, so I'm just going to. All right.
That building is still there, as far as I know.
It's like still a big deal auditorium, apparently.
It's an event hall. I want to say there were some investors that had bought out the property after the church kind of, went bankrupt and split apart. And then I know, tore down some of the buildings and I don't know what else they did, but okay. Only a couple weeks after the dedication of the Ambassador Auditorium brings us to Armstrong's Manila campaign. Armstrong traveled to the Philippines for like a 3-day public lecture. He claims he was talking to a crowd of like 25,000 people in the Araneta Coliseum. He talked about things like the purpose of life, reasons why we were born, and then, of course, he talked about his philosophy of give and get. So Armstrong is literally doing all these campaigns around the world. Manila was one of his early ones where he's really just recruiting people to his organization so that he can get that tithe money. He's
Oh,
talking about
yeah.
give, give, give. And he's making it seem like these people are not giving to him. They're giving to God. They're giving to the church, and you're going to have all these heavenly rewards. That was his ploy.
And these are the people that were literally colonized and had everything taken from them. So they would have already like had some sense of what was being taken from them. And I can see the idea of giving instead of taking being appealing then.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Something
And I
else.
have beef with that concept though, honestly. The whole give versus get thing has harmed me throughout my life in terms of feeling like I always had to give and volunteer, donate my time, donate my money, donate my talents, and that I should not ever expect something back for it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Even in cases of like a job, it's like, okay, well, I understand that I take this job and it's for that amount of money, and that I could handle. But as soon as it's anything about me receiving something back for what I have with my heart given out, felt
Mm-hmm.
wrong. And
Yeah.
I'm only now learning to accept that when something is given, well, that means the person on the receiving end is getting. And so it's
Yes.
always give and get.
Yeah.
And we should
Yeah.
be looking for balance in our transactions like that.
Okay, so I wanted to mention one more significant thing that happened during this infamous Manila campaign of Armstrong's. Do you remember that he went on to marry that far younger woman named Ramona?
I mean, I knew there was a younger woman later in his life, but that's connected to Manila.
In a sense. So during the Manila campaign, there was apparently either some publications or books, things that needed to be printed, and they needed to get to Manila right away. And Ramona Martin, this young woman, like secretary receptionist type who had been with the organization for a while, she got sent to Manila with these documents. And apparently, this is kind of the start of when things happen between her and Armstrong. Mind you, there's a significant age difference here. He does go on to marry her. He was like, I don't even know how old. I've heard conflicting ages, but I want to say he was 84, she was 38 when they married. Gross, I know. And I will mention this, there are some rumors out there, people suggesting that Stanley Rader again actually got Ramona because the two of them were friends. Ramona was good friends with Stanley Rader.
What?
And some people say that he pushed Ramona to get close to Armstrong and ultimately ended up marriage because he wanted information that she was apparently providing back to him.
That is scandalous.
Again, this just came out. There are other people that say Ramona was deeply traumatized from Armstrong, like he was very abusive in a number of different ways. And he accused her of infidelity. It goes back and forth. But again, I'm just mentioning this because this is like the start of how that came about or how he got connected with this secretary. Okay.
So she was only supposed to like his 84-year-old balls. I'm sorry. It sounded okay in my head. It did not sound okay when it came out of my mouth.
Can I tell you something really gross?
Okay.
There was another one of those books that had come out that was like very anti-Armstrong, where the guy talked about how Armstrong never got blowjobs and any kinky sex from his first wife, Loma, that she was the frigid wife who never did anything, even though he's the one that told his ministry about, missing dimension in sex, the book that we're covering, and how there's only like apparently 2 sex positions that you're supposed to do. And he was bragging to this other guy about how Ramona would give him blowjobs and stuff like that. Yeah.
Wow.
And the guy mentioned specifically that Armstrong forbid things like oral sex.
That's true.
And apparently that all went out the window when he had a young, hot take and she was doing all this stuff. Oh.
Okay.
I hope she.
I mean, Armstrong ate lard-filled pastries if he wanted to also. So
He did.
yeah.
Other people said that too. He would eat things like pork and shellfish. He did what he wanted while he told his ministry. Yeah, never mind. Okay. Only 2 months after the Manila campaign, okay, Armstrong is going all over the world during this point. He has a meeting with King Hussein bin Talal of Jordan. Apparently, since 1966, Armstrong had begun broadcasting negotiations with the aid of the King of Jordan. So he's in contact with him for quite some time. And then he finally gets an audience with him. And the King of Jordan, I think, had agreed to this because he had plans to surge the power of Jerusalem radio. Like he was in, like competition with Egypt. He was on the forefront of like radio and those early communications, and he knew he had a way in through Armstrong, and so he got an audience with him. And Armstrong did what he normally did with foreign leaders. He gave Steuben crystal. Every foreign dignitary that he met with, apparently, he would give this gift of Steuben crystal. It's like kind of a bribe, right? But he had so much money by this point. He's just like, okay, I'm going to give it to the people knowing that, hey, I'm your ally. You do shit for me. I do shit for you. Yeah.
Really?
Yep.
I mean, it's kind of like, when people want to go gamble, they'll send money ahead, like a lot of money ahead to a casino or whatever to prove to the casino that like, hey, I'm serious. I'm going to come spend money at your place. So then they get gifted like, oh, how about we give you a free room then? How about we give you this, right? Because you've proved to them that like, hey, I have money and I'm serious by sending that money ahead. Same fucking thing with Steuben Crystal.
Now, we jump ahead only 1 month. So this is the 4th of July, 1974. Armstrong is in Paris. Something else significant happens. He takes Ramona Martin on their first official date alone. Keep in mind, she's been with him this whole time, traveling around to these different countries while he's spreading his message, getting more money. They had lunch in the courtyard luncheon room of one of the hotels in Paris, which was pretty close to their hotel. I don't know if they were knocking boots at this point, but ew. 1974, I want to say our parents met in that year. Is that kind of around the time period where maybe they were either dating or things were getting serious between the two of them?
I think maybe by 1974, both of our parents had gotten connected to the church, but in different places. Because I'm pretty sure our dad got connected to it while living in Michigan and working there. And mom grew up and was still in California. So I think they were both found there. They both found the church at that point. But then it was somewhere in that 75, 76, I think, that dad's company transferred him out to California. And that's how they met, was in the church.
And that would make sense. Dad was in Battle Creek, Michigan, I remember, which is where Seventh-day Adventist was founded. So it wouldn't surprise me if that concept was very saturated into that area and our dad got involved and then he got transferred to California where, Pasadena, California, well, California in general, I'm sure Worldwide Church of God was just everywhere.
Yeah.
Especially in
I
that
think
area.
he was more Silicon Valley because he came out for the tech boom.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Silicon Valley. Yep.
So you have a stat in here that says by 1975, the Worldwide Church of God was bringing in $67 million a year, which would be like $386 million in today's dollars.
Yeah, the church would have bragged about the amount of money that came through, but they have some issues with the state of California. And so
are you saying that maybe they were bringing in more than that, but they weren't publicly claiming as much as they were bringing in?
As far as
they were already in trouble for tax fraud stuff, right?
Right.
At some point.
No,
okay.
Not yet.
Not yet. Oh, okay.
They were being investigated, I think, by this point, though. Keep in mind, 1975 is the year that Armstrong talked about in his book, 1975 in Prophecy, where he said the world was going to end. And I think some people were frustrated over the fact that the world hadn't ended during that time. And that also caused some unsettlement within the church, I guess you'd say.
No surprise. I mean, I don't know how it doesn't just cause mass exodus and like everyone's like, oh, I guess this wasn't real and I should go unfuck myself. I don't know.
I mean, what a way to live where you're only looking forward to what happens after you're dead.
Or the destruction of everything around you and everything you've known.
Well, people welcome it because they think this other place they're going to is so much better than this one.
It's so sad, actually.
It's
because I really think if we gave this world, the current situation we all find ourselves in, some credit and allowed a little hope within ourselves, my gosh, we could actually do better. Like throughout history, things actually are getting better for humans. It's slow. It's not perfect right now, but perfect doesn't exist. So if we stop believing shit like this, we can actually work together and do better for all humans. I'm going to keep fucking saying that. I don't care if it sounds repetitive because it needs to be a thing we bring within ourselves. Hope that we can do better together.
Yeah.
We
But
stop
again,
fucking fighting and letting bullshit people tell us lies. Oh my God.
I know. But again, he targeted the most vulnerable people, the people that didn't have lives that were satisfying to them. But again, 1975. So you got to imagine that some of his followers at this point were starting to question, like, okay, the world's going to end any time now. In the midst of that, Armstrong is just having a whale of a time traveling around the world, getting new followers, getting so much tithe money. The Plain Truth magazine is going into all of these foreign countries using that tithe money, and with the assistance of Stanley Rader. He creates the Ambassador International Cultural Foundation. What the fuck is that, you ask?
A sham, a front? Is that what you're gonna tell me?
According to Armstrong, it was used to fight things like illiteracy, create schools for the disabled, like he cared about the disabled, and to fund several archaeological digs in places like Jerusalem of biblical significance, which of course Israel was on board with. Very much so.
Yeah, there's a lot of shit like that going on over there.
And of course, Armstrong became a self-proclaimed international ambassador for world peace. I don't think
Yeah.
he was officially called this. This is something that he claims everyone saw him as because of this foundation that he founded in 1975.
So the whole thing was another game to get more money coming in, because even if people weren't going to be the ones doing the tithe thing, if he's seen on some world stage as doing things for world peace, and look at what he could point to. He could point to, like, we've created all these schools for the disabled. We have programs to fight illiteracy. We are building the world tomorrow right now. Don't you want to donate to what our cause is? Every scam he could spin off of this, he did.
Stanley Rader was about as douchey as they get and about as corrupt as you could get. That man had so much money. I think in his 60 Minutes interview, he bragged about what? He got upwards towards like 300,000 a year, which would be a lot for today's standards, but this is 1975.
I think it was 200,000. But yeah, I was trying to do the calculation actually. So if you're saying 67 million would be like 386 million today, that's like 1.2 mil. So in today's money, Stanley Rader, for his job being the accountant, financial, whatever, treasurer person of the Worldwide Church of God organization, was getting approximately $1.2 million a year in salary and had a private jet at his disposal. That guy was living good. He knew his game well.
And Armstrong actually paid for his education too.
Well, and he was the one handling the money, so, you know, question mark, question mark, question mark.
He had all kinds of shady businesses going on. All that money coming through. A lot of it our parents gave.
Well, not a lot of it, don't kid yourself. But I get what you're saying.
But, okay, not a lot of it, but when you have that many people giving even just a little bit of tithe money, and then all of a sudden they tier it up to 20%, 30%.
I think even in that 60 Minutes bit that you shared with me, that's exactly what they were talking about, that once you add up the 2 tithes plus the every third year tithe plus special offerings plus whatever, you're looking at members letting go of 30% of the gross of their income. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, you're either living in poverty, you're definitely not saving for retirement or anything because you don't think that that's going to happen. You're not putting money away for your children's college, for your children's future life to like help them get going.
Yeah.
And so all of this like whole generational wealth thing that of course has been available to white people more than it has to people of color in our country.
Of course.
Armstrong was able to make people part with that idea entirely. Yeah. And so, well, I mean, talk about generational curses. He didn't just affect those people, he affected their children because the money that should have been there to help them get started, you know, if they had enough to begin with, wasn't. So fuck all the way off, Herbert W. Armstrong. I slogged my way through all the stuff I had to do.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I would do it again, but fuck you.
And David CPAC. He's teaching the exact same thing about don't have any 401k or any sort of investments, things like that. Give it all to the church. All right, Pat. So that same year, again, Armstrong is still traveling around the world. He attends the Lions Club convention of Bombay, India, which is now Mumbai, In 1975, he met with Judge Nagendra Singh. And he also at one point met Indira Gandhi, who was the
Really?
prime minister. It had something to do with this cultural foundation that he founded. Again, he's trying to get a positive image in the limelight. And
I feel like it's so obvious. He had kind of outgrown his little fishbowl.
1975 also brings us, that was a really significant year for the
Seriously.
WCG. Wow. There's a man named Bob Geringer. He was an evangelist for the Worldwide Church of God. Sent what I call the Geringer letter. He sent it to the evangelist over there at the England campus of Ambassador College in Bricketwood, to Charles Hunting. And what this was is kind of the very start of when doctrinal changes started to come about.
It starts getting exposed.
It
Is what you're
starts
saying?
getting exposed. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
By this Bob Geringer. He sent a really long letter to another evangelist, again, the one who was operating the Bricketwood campus, Ambassador
Okay.
College, because remember, there were 3 campuses for Ambassador College. There was one in Pasadena, one in Big Sandy, Texas, and one in Bricketwood near London in England. But yeah, within weeks of this letter, this evangelist was, I want to say, the first to resign from the WCG. By this point, over the last 2 years or so, there were at least 80 ministers that had resigned. Now, remember, evangelist is on a higher tier than just ministers. There were other people within the church that started to publish things like Ambassador Review magazine, as well as some newsletters that had come out. There's some names here: John Treachak, Tim Nugent, and a number of other people that created this magazine talking about the corruption. So, I mean, the information is getting out there.
Wow.
About lies, corruption, about Stanley Rader, about Armstrong, misuse of money, all kinds of stuff, especially surrounding Ambassador College.
Colleges, I think, are a pretty ripe space for abuse of people and taking their money.
Right.
Who else did that? Did someone else who's a well-known shyster in our society right now have a college? A university named after him, perhaps? I think so. Huh.
The year after that, we are in 1977. On April 17th, Armstrong married Ramona Martin. By this point, Armstrong has another home in Tucson, Arizona. Like I said, old Herbie, literally old, was like 84 years old at this point, and his new young bride was 38. She was the receptionist that has been working for Worldwide Church of God headquarters in Pasadena. People were not happy about this. She was a divorcee with a 15-year-old son from a prior marriage, and we know his thoughts on marriage and divorce. If you have divorce, you're supposed to like try to go back to who you were married to.
Right.
Like if you remarry somebody else, you're supposed to divorce them and try to go back to who you were married to. How
Well,
many
yeah.
marriages and families got torn apart from that ideology? Because I think that didn't change. Maybe it did. By this point, I don't know.
Maybe,
Marriage and
but
divorce went through a shift back and forth.
well, they had to. That's ridiculous what they were asking people to do early on, at least. But isn't it interesting to see, like, with all of these things, he has gotten to a point where he doesn't give a fuck. He doesn't give a fuck if he's doing the things that he's telling everyone not to do. He's not even like trying to hide it at
Right.
this point. He's just like too far above that. Can't even see the image he's creating, probably, because he's just so already in his own, like, I'm going to do what I want to do.
But his hardcore followers would stick with him no matter what. That was the very scary part, especially our parents. Yeah.
Well, and they were just getting into it at this point, like at the point that he's getting married to Ramona. Like
Weird.
yeah, it is weird. Well, and maybe that was why it wasn't a big deal that our mom had been married before and then married our dad.
Maybe.
I know it always seemed like it was a little bit of a stain on their marriage, though. Like, I remember it was a big deal that she didn't wear a white dress when she married dad. It was like light green.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know if that was a personal preference or if the church had like some influence or something, but it always seemed like, it had a little bit of a shaminess attached to it or something. It felt like something maybe wasn't right about
But,
what they had done.
but we didn't even know that mom was married prior to our dad for a long time. You found some object within mom's belongings that she had a different last name, and you asked her about it, and that's when it came out, right?
Yeah, I think it was a nail clippers. And then the whole story came out. I think I was 8. What? And you never knew. Apparently, I never told you either. I can't believe the
So,
things that, like, it blew your mind when I told you this.
yes.
Yeah.
Like, are you fucking serious? Patty, I feel like we don't really know our parents that much anyway.
Nope.
But that was quite a blow. Not that I really cared. I just thought that it was worth mentioning. Like, mom, you were married before dad. Okay.
Yeah.
No
I mean, that's
kids.
not just the church,
But
though. That's cultural. I think at the time there was a
right.
lot of like shame associated with the divorce stuff.
And he was apparently from a very prominent family. Would you say he was like South American or something? He even
Um,
had a street named after him there in
yeah.
San Jose.
I think his family lineage, her first husband's family lineage was kind of along the line of conquistador family,
Oh,
Spanish
okay.
family that had come to, Southern California at some point, colonizing Spaniards, I'm pretty sure.
And we know Armstrong's thoughts on interracial marriage, at least for a while. Well, I'm living in sin, being married to an Indian man. Okay. Fuck off, Herbie. Okay, so that happened, but some of the details surrounding that marriage. So they got married in a very small ceremony at Armstrong's home in Tucson. By this point, Ramona, I think, had been working for the church for around 12 years. Obviously, she's spending a lot of time with Herbie, whether that was orchestrated or
Apparently.
not, and she really wanted that man in every way. Remains to be seen, but sometimes even money speaks volume. I'm not saying that she married him for money. I'm just saying there had to be more to it than that. You can't tell me she wanted that ass.
All I can think of is the old balls. Oh.
By this point, Armstrong and his son Ted are still on good terms because Ted actually officiated this wedding. There was like 50 guests in attendance. That
So
happened.
Ted
There was
officiated the wedding of a woman younger than him to his own father. That had to be exciting.
Ramona's there looking at Ted officiating that, and she's like, I prefer that for tonight as opposed to what I'm actually marrying. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
So awkward.
You know it's true.
I mean, maybe she was doing both of them.
Oh, that's really gross.
Ew, I
That's
think I'm
really
going to
gross.
hell for even thinking about that.
Don't worry, there's no hell. You're fine.
Oh, thank you for telling me that.
So Armstrong has just gotten married. And that very same year, a couple books in opposition to Armstrong come out. I know there's more than what I'm mentioning here, but
Mhm.
one of the major ones that came out was Armstrongism, Religion or Ripoff by Marion J. McNair. You can find this book on the website Exit Support Network. Now, McNair, of course, used to work for Armstrong. He got a little insight into what was going on. So, of course, he was an evangelist on the pretty high tier of Armstrong's organization. And he explains in his book how Armstrong and Stanley Rader, how they stole ties for personal use. Things
Surprise.
like, yeah, surprise. He talked about Armstrong's very refined taste in expensive things, his failed prophecies he talks a lot about, and how Armstrong during this time period just started to see himself as like higher than Jesus. Like he just, wealth and power do that to people. Like he was
Yes.
just, things
Well,
started to change and people didn't like it.
This is what I'm saying with by 1975, he thinks it's fine to just marry this 38-year-old divorcee and expect his people to just be like, yeah, okay, that's fine. You do whatever, even though it's against what you said. The guardrails are coming off or the wheels are coming off, whatever metaphor you want to use. Like, it's losing it. He's losing it. I mean, he's old enough that he's probably not even mentally all there anymore, and he's still pounding on the desk for the world tomorrow because he'd done it for so many years. It's just like in there,
Yeah,
But was he really like as cognizant by then?
probably
Maybe
not.
not. Yeah.
But he was just enjoying his life. I mean, that much money, man, just living it up. I even read in one book somebody saying that he had once bought a champagne bottle like bucket that's made of pure silver, and it was like $8,000 during that time period. That would be expensive today.
Mm.
But this was also during a time period where the church was really struggling for funds. And I mean,
$8,000
$8,000.
would have put new carpets in our house where we had carpets with holes to the subfloor because our parents were trying to make sure God got his due.
Right.
So meanwhile, Armstrong had a silver fucking ice bucket.
Armstrong never would come right out and ask people for money, right?
Right.
He had a tactic. He's like, I have free literature for you. That was like, give me your address and I'll give you this literature. And then he would give sob sort of stories about him growing up, without a lot and all the things that he did for this organization. He got people to give their money and he got them to give generously. So that's a book worth checking out. There's another one that came out the exact same year. It was called The Broadway to Armageddon by William B. Henson. I haven't read this one yet, but from what I understand, the author's son did actually die because he needed modern day medicine, and unfortunately Armstrong taught against that, and he lost his son over that.
Jeez.
But he also discusses things like the marriage and divorce restrictions that we were just talking about, as well as Sabbath day restrictions, like you couldn't do shit on Sabbath is basically what he was saying. Later that year, I want to say August of 1977, Armstrong suffered congestive heart failure. I don't know if he actually used doctors at this point. There was even one source that said his wife had actually saved his life during this time period. I don't know much about this. I just know that he had something happen. Summer of 1978. This is when
it's gonna get juicy now.
Exactly. This is when his son Ted actually got disfellowshipped from the church. Apparently it was over a phone call that his father decided to just, you're out of there, buddy. I'm sure Stanley Rader had a lot to do with it. Again, I think Ted tried to get back at his dad, whether it had something to do with what was done to his sister, and the truth came out, and then he was excommunicated. He's like, well, fine, I'm gonna tell the world about all your shit now. And so the two were batting at each other, and Stanley Rader is still pretty prominent during this time. And our parents got married in summer of 1978. So around the time when Ted got excommunicated, our parents did get married. So obviously they're very involved in the church at this point because they were in the church beforehand. This is how they met each other.
Okay, so I just, as you were talking, my brain had this moment of mom saying something about Garner Ted that made me think she found him
Hot.
yeah, nice to look at.
He was like the Elvis of the times, women loved it.
You're not
Right?
wrong.
I mean, she's still a flesh and blood woman,
As much as she tries to deny it. I don't know that I'd fully like integrated the timing of the Garner Ted stuff because it sounded like ancient history by the time I heard about it, but it really would have been right when our parents were both getting into the church. Wow. And just before they got married.
After Garner Ted was excommunicated from his father, he went on almost right away to create his own church in Tyler, Texas. It's still there.
Was this the first splinter or were there others before?
No, there were other splinters, I think, by this point. There were so many splinters, I can't even keep track. I'm sure they all claimed to be like the first splinter church. So he had followers that supported him after his father excommunicated him. There's so many people excommunicated from the WCG, so many.
You can't have dissenters. You don't get to have conversations in a dictatorship. Emphasis on the dick.
I thought it important to note that 1978, when Ted found his church, that's also when Overcomer Ministries came onto the scene. It was founded by Brother Stair. I know you don't know a lot about him, but I do. You had gone off to college, and our dad, when he left the church for not being strict enough for changing the doctrine, he started following Overcomer Ministries, which we'll talk about later, but this is when his church was founded.
So now Brother Stair followed like a Seventh Day Sabbath model, right? Was that
Right.
kind of the main point of commonality, or did he really pick up on more Armstrong-y stuff?
He definitely was not a splinter church of WCG, but a lot of the people that were leaving the WCG did go over to Overcomer Ministry because he was also a radio voice. It just, people found him, it's kind of, it's like, you're not strict enough for me. You're not fundamentalist enough for me. Like, I gotta go to like the worst I can find. And of course, our parents went over to Restored Church of God as soon as that was created, Our dad is literally just trying to find a place to go where they're still teaching this shit. It's like nothing can ever be good enough for him. Like he has to be perfect for his God.
Right. Well, that's a trauma
He-
response, right? Like, I have to find the perfect, the only, the true church. Perfect doesn't
Okay.
exist.
The state of California versus Worldwide Church of God. Yes.
That sounds entertaining.
The attorney general at the time, he opened an investigation into these allegations that millions of dollars, I'm sure it was, a year had been stolen from the Worldwide Church of God and from Armstrong and Stanley Rader themselves. During this time, Rader, he decided to rally all the Christians that he possibly could to their cause, any religious groups, and he was able to successfully introduce a bill into California legislature that restricted the AG's authority to conduct civil, but not criminal, financial investigations into California, religious and nonprofit organizations. Meaning,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, the AG had to drop its litigation by the following year. It's
Because
politics.
the religious organizations got political and were like, we're a church, you can't do anything to us. Oh,
Mhm.
all right, I'm gonna get mad again.
This happens all the time today, Pats.
That's what I was gonna say. This crap is still happening.
Mhm.
Churches who abuse people are using the fact that they're a religious organization to get away with their fuckery, and it's not okay.
Why do you think we have so many churches out there? It's a moneymaker, dude.
I could handle not paying taxes. That sounds fun. Can I start the church
Yeah.
of Unfuck Yourself?
Tax-free donated dollars. Let's do it, Pats.
Hey.
All right, we're almost done. 1979, the last year, Pats. Now, there's a man named David Robinson. He was excommunicated from the Worldwide Church of God in 1979. He is significant. We're not going to get into his book just yet because it came out in 1980, the following year. But he did write the book Herbert Armstrong's Tangled Web. And this is going to be very important because a lot of the information about Armstrong came out in this book. We'll talk about it next time. But
Ooh, okay.
yeah, 1979 is when he was excommunicated. And you know what happens to people who are thrown out of organizations when they have some sensitive information that they're holding on to. Like, I don't give a fuck anymore. This information is going to come out now.
Oh, they have tea, lots of tea, going to spill all the tea.
Stanley Rader's 60 Minutes interview.
That was April 15th, 1979.
Yep. Why?
I was an embryo.
Wow.
And
This is
we
when the
watched 60 Minutes growing up all the time.
We
So
did.
did they see this? When I watched
Oh.
that earlier, I was like, y'all, were you watching? Did you not see?
I remember our dad watching 60 Minutes all the time. There's no way they didn't see the one with Stanley Rader when he was interviewed by Mike Wallace. Stanley Rader literally exits the room and he accuses Mike Wallace of obtaining information illegally, and then he says he's going to sue him. It's all kinds of a clusterfuck. Armstrong, of course, is still defending Stanley Rader by this point.
It showed that behind closed doors, Armstrong was like, I'm going to get that little fucker Stanley Rader. And then when it came to blows between them, he got out there in front of his ministers and was like, I stand behind this man. How dare you say anything else? Like, whoa, there was some shenanigans going on. The backbiting, the bullshit. Can you even imagine?
Everyone had their fingers up Armstrong's asshole at this point, and that all just trying to get as much out of that man as they could. I bet Armstrong himself was pretty manipulated. I feel like he was pretty manipulated just as much by Stanley Rader. as Stanley Rader was by Armstrong. I mean, just a mess relationship, these two. And then Garner Ted was also stuck in the midst of it. So
Garner Ted was just born into it. I mean, he doesn't
yeah.
get a pass on his bullshit either, but you know.
He doesn't get a pass, but again, as I said in the last video, I don't think he really wanted anything to do with this either. He was also kind of a victim of the circumstances, and he was doing what he could to survive as well. He enjoyed it at one point.
Especially all the pussy.
He was hot for the 70s, right?
Yeah, he had that hot man 70s look about him, for sure.
Women always talk about that serial killer. What was this? Ted Bundy was like this serial killer that all the women wanted to. You know, despite the fact that he's a serial killer, women still wanted him. I think that was the 70s.
That's so weird. I've heard of
It
that.
is so
Women
weird,
like
but
writing to murderers in prison and like being like super into that. It's got to be a trauma
women,
response too. Everything weird about us is a trauma response.
I feel like a lot of women just like power, like men who are like on TV and famous. So I think Ted was one of those guys. Women are just like, he's on TV and he's cute, so I'm gonna go for it.
I have heard the idea that women, by the capriciousness of patriarchy, end up having to fend for their lives by clinging on to the power of the men they're attached to. So it's a pretty gross situation women have been in for a very long time and really still are to a large extent.
All right, so one more thing I wanted to mention from 1979, another publication that came out in the American Lawyer. It was titled The Devil and Stanley Rader by Henry Goldman. So people can go ahead and read that too, but there's all kinds of crap coming out about Stanley Rader around this time and how corrupt he is. I mean, all you have to do is look at his face and you're like, oh my God, he's the biggest douche. You can see it. You can see it in him.
Why is that? I want to hear from the other culty babies out there. Like, is this a thing that you all know too? Where Nancy and I have talked about this a lot, where sometimes it's like I would have said at one point, it's like I can see the devil in their eyes. But it's like, yeah, you can just see in their faces the fact that they don't respect anyone, that they're like living out this horrible life for themselves. I don't know. What do you have to say about that? I don't even know what to say. It's so strange to feel like I know things about someone by looking at their eyes, but I don't know how else to explain it.
Well, I get the same vibes by looking at Trump. Do you actually think he cares about anyone except himself? I don't know how anyone looks at him and be like, oh yeah, he cares about us little folk on the bottom.
I don't either.
Stanley Rader is exactly the same. And I keep feeling like I'm almost saying Trump instead of Armstrong just because there's so many parallels between the two.
I mean, it's an archetype. I don't know what the name of that archetype is, but it's an archetype of us humans, you know, if we're going to go all Jungian on it, maybe.
But I figure a good place to end here, Patti. So all we did was talk about the 70s today. The 80s in the Worldwide Church of God also has kind of an upheaval, or I think it kind of has a comeback in the 80s. That, of course, is when you and I were children. You were born in December 1979. And so that brings us to the 80s on the next time. All right. That was the 70s. Whew. Wow.
I had no idea of the like political climate of the church that was happening at the time I made my emergence.
Because the church tried to cover it up. And I don't think these things actually really came to light until years later. Sure, there were publications, but it was like the church dismissed them, like just like David C. Pack is doing with what he calls haters, people like us and people like ex-restored COG on TikTok, try to shut them up.
Time has run out for these stupid ideologies to control people. So before we go, I wanted to mention that Nancy and I are very serious about bringing in some of you former Worldwide Church of God and Splinter Group folks. We want to start interviewing you. So please reach out if you have any interest in being a part of that. You can go ahead and email apostatesisters, all one word, at gmail.com. And we will be ready to talk with you about doing that.
I did want to mention as well, if some of you do not want your face on camera, you don't have to be. If you just want to tell us your story and we can share it with the world, everyone has their own experiences and perspectives on what happened throughout this organization or might still be happening. Please do contact us. Like and subscribe. Yay!